So today's topic of discussion will be diabetes and bone. And to get us through this, may I invite Dr. Kallan Kumar Gangopadhyay sir as our chairperson of today's event. Sir is working as a consultant endocrinologist in CK Villa Hospital and PLS Hospital of Kolkata. I would also like to invite today's speaker, Dr. Rimesh Pal sir. Sir is working as an assistant professor in postgraduate Institution of Medical Education and Research, Chandigarh. So with this, may I request Dr. Kallan Kumar Gangopadhyay sir to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Abhirup. I hope I'm audible.
Right. Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, okay. So I think today the topic is diabetes and the bone. So it might not appear as sexy as SGLT2 and CV outcome data, but I can assure you that we are all so fed up of CVOTs and CVOTs and CVOTs that there doesn't seem to be an end to this. So now I think it is a refreshing change that we are talking about something different and something I think is as relevant, if not more, that is the bones. There are a lot of unanswered questions as far as diabetes and bone are concerned. Do type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, are they different as far as the bone structure is concerned or its pathology is concerned? Do we think that type 1 is at more risk of fracture than type 2 diabetes? Do we think that the bone mineral density is less in type 1 or less in type 2 or more in type 2? The FRAC score, does it take into account the type 2 diabetes, which will have an impact on the treatment? There are lots of unanswered questions. And today, I think this session would open up, I'm sure it will open up more questions than answers. That I can say that our speaker, Dr. Rimesh Pal, will unravel a lot of the mysteries, a lot of the enigma which is surrounding this subject. So over to Dr. Rimesh Pal for this topic, diabetes and bone.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank Endocrine Society of Bengal and Dr. Shomik and Professor Nilanjan for letting me speak. And I would also like to thank Dr. Abhirup for coordinating the event. And before I start, I would like to thank my mentor, of course, Professor Sanjay Badada, who happens to be the head of our department, who have helped me in developing an interest in the section of bone and mineral metabolism. So I'm really grateful to Professor Sanjay as well. So I will just share my slides. So is it visible?
Yes, sir.
I will just play
yes,
the slides. So is it visible in a slideshow mode, right?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Great. So are the slides moving as well?
Yes, sir.
Slides are moving, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I will be speaking over the next 30-40 minutes about diabetes and bone. Indeed, it is one of the least spoken about topic when we talk about diabetes, and probably one of the neglected aspects of diabetes. In spite of the fact that, considering the fact that the burden of diabetes in India is so huge, keeping that scenario in mind, we also expect that the burden of diabetes related bone disease would also be enormous. Hence, we need. I felt the need to sensitize our young residents about this topic, and I think I will move forward. Yeah. So I will be speaking about. I will concentrate on this following aspects: fracture risk in diabetes mellitus. What are the determinants of fracture risk? I will divide this determinants into three aspects: bone quantity, bone quality, and bone strength. How to estimate fracture risk in diabetes? How is it different from a non-diabetic individual? Risk factors for fracture in diabetes, and what is the management of bone disease in a subject with diabetes? So as we know that hyperglycemia tend to affect most of the organ systems of the body, which we refer to as a microangiopathy. So that the prototype, the stereotype microangiopathies are the retinopathy, the nephropathy, and the neuropathy. However, if we look into the skeleton as a whole, the skeleton receives 10% of the cardiac output, and glucose is essential for effective working of the beta cells. Hence, the involvement of the skeleton in diabetes can no less be regarded as a microvascular complication. It should rather be considered as a microvascular complication of diabetes over and above the classical three which we usually talk about. So what is the fracture risk in diabetes? So is it just a hype, or is it a reality that fracture risk is increased in diabetes? So I will divide it into as per the type of diabetes. What is the fracture risk in type 1 diabetes, and what is the fracture risk in type 2 diabetes? If we look into this meta-analysis that was performed somewhere in 2015, this study clearly shows that the risk of any fractures, that includes vertebral as well as non-vertebral fractures, the risk of any fractures is increased in type 1 diabetes, and with a relative risk of 3.16. In other words, a patient, or rather a subject with type 1 diabetes is at least threefold high, is at least at a threefold high risk of developing any fracture compared to a subject without type 1 diabetes. So this and on subgroup analysis, the study found that the risk of hip fracture was the relative risk was around 3.7, vertebral fracture around 2.8, somewhere around 3, and the risk of fracture was higher in women than in men. Subsequently, this was a somewhat older study, like somewhere in 2007, but it is a highly quoted study actually. They found that the risk of hip fracture was as high as 6.3%. So if we summarize, the risk of fracture in type 1 diabetes varies between 3 to 6%, which is pretty high, which is and something that cannot be neglected, cannot be kept aside. Sorry. Yeah. Now, if we consider the risk of fracture in type 2 diabetes, so this was the same meta-analysis in 2007. The risk of hip fracture was around 1.7 times. So compared to a general individual, compared to a non-diabetic, or rather a control healthy subject, a patient, rather a subject with type 2 diabetes is at least at 70% high risk of developing a fracture. However, if we compare it with type 1 diabetes, it is much less. In type 1 diabetes, the relative risk was six times. In type 2 diabetes, it is only 1.7 times. And it is just a summary of the two. So this is another widely quoted study by Vestergaard from Denmark. So they found that the risk of any fracture, hip fracture, wrist fracture, and spine fracture all were increased in type 1 diabetes, while in type 2 diabetes, the risk of spine fracture was not statistically significant. As you can see here, the confidence interval was crossing 1. However, the risk of any fracture, hip fracture, and wrist fracture were considerably higher, compared to a non-diabetic healthy cohort. So there is no doubt, there is no doubt to the fact that diabetes increases the risk of fracture, and the risk of fracture is higher in type 1 diabetes compared to type 2 diabetes. And so, and if we consider the two important fracture, that is hip and spine, that constitutes major osteoporotic fracture, MOF, because hip and spine fracture are associated with a poor morbidity and poor mortality. Both are increased in type 1 and type 2 diabetes, more so in type 1 diabetes. So apart from the fact that diabetes increases the risk of fractures, what are the fracture outcomes in patients with diabetes? So even it has been shown that fracture outcomes in patients with diabetes are poor. They tend to have a poor prognosis because of delayed healing, frequent infections. They tend to have a longer hospital stay, and then they tend to have more post-operative cardiovascular outcomes. So a subject with diabetes is more likely to develop a fracture, and after he develops a fracture, he or she is more likely to have a poorer outcome than a subject without diabetes. So what are the determinants of fracture risk? So this is something very important. So the determinants of fracture risk are bone strength. I will start with bone quality, bone quantity, bone quantity, bone quality, and bone strength. Usually what we in our routine clinical practice, we lay most emphasis on what we call bone quantity, which is usually measured by DEXA, which is measured in terms of bone mineral density. So we lay more emphasis on bone quantity, but in the context of diabetes, bone quality plays a very important role, and so does bone strength. However, what do I say? I mean, infrastructure, other methodologies to assess bone strength are somewhat less available. However, there are lots of methodologies available to assess bone quality. Hence, bone quality plays an utmost importance in as far as bone disease in diabetes is concerned. However, going by the norm, I will start with bone quantity in diabetes, which is measured by BMD, which is measured as bone mineral density by DEXA. So type 1 in type 1 diabetes, BMD is usually low. That is a traditional teaching. In fact, that is a correct teaching, I would rather say. Bone dense BMD is usually low in type 1 diabetes. However, and in type 2 diabetes, the traditional teaching is bone density is either normal or slightly elevated. Even that is something odd, but that is what we know. So in type 1 diabetes, bone density is reduced by 5 to 10% compared to a subject without type 1 diabetes, age and sex match subject without type 1 diabetes. While in type 2 diabetes, the BMD is either normal or in fact 4 to 5% higher if we compare it with a age and sex matched rather subject without type 2 diabetes. However, the non-traditional teaching is that, however, there are data, rather non-traditional data, which says that BMD has really been reported to be normal in type 1 diabetes. At the same time, there are ample data actually, which says that BMD is low in type 2 diabetes. So to summarize, I would rather say it would be more apt to say that in type 1 diabetes, BMD is usually low. However, in type 2 diabetes, BMD is more of variable rather than high or normal. BMD is rather variable in type 2 diabetes, depending on the scenario, depending on the studies, depending on the ethnicity. So a little bit about the mechanistic insight. I mean, this is a bit, busy slide. I can understand. I will try to simplify it. So I will just ask the audience to concentrate on two aspects. So there's osteoblast. Osteoblast function is reduced in diabetes, while osteoclast function is increased in diabetes. So there is reduced bone formation at the same time there is increased bone resorption. So what are the just a second. So what are the determinants of reduced osteoblast function and increased osteoclast function? So the determinants are, I will just apologize. Yeah. So the common determinants are advanced ligation end products. I will just some difficulty with the, yeah, the common are basically advanced ligation end products, hyperglycemia, and reactive oxygen species. So this advanced ligation end product, hyperglycemia, and reactive oxygen species, this is rather functional. This is operating in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So now this is there is no differentiation between the two. So age, hyperglycemia per se, hyperglycemia per se, and reactive oxygen species per se. The three per se can directly inhibit osteoblast function and can per se directly stimulate osteoclast. However, if we look specifically into type 1 diabetes, in type 1 diabetes, certain factors are exclusively functional, like reduced IGF-1 levels, insulin deficiency, and amylin levels. These three are solely functional in rather solely operative, I would say, in type 1 diabetes, which per se also compromises bone health. Other factors that should be taken note of being hypercalciuria. Basically, hyperglycemia, osmotic diuresis leads to hypercalciuria, which exerts a negative calcium balance, per se affecting bone mineralization, rather promoting bone demineralization. Second is again osmotic diuresis leading to hypomagnesemia. So hypomagnesemia per se can lead to secretory defect at the level of the parathyroid gland can lead to reduced secretion of PTH. But usually what happens in diabetic bone disease is per se a state of parathyroid, it is per se a state of parathyroid resistance rather. Parathyroid levels are usually slightly elevated, more of a secondary hyperparathyroid state. So apart from hypomagnesemia, apart from inhibiting parathyroid levels, can also induce a state of parathyroid resistance, thereby increasing parathyroid levels. And lastly, I want to talk about sclerostin. So it has been shown that sclerostin levels are elevated in type 2 diabetes. I specifically want to mention the fact type 2 diabetes, because it has been shown that sclerostin levels are reduced in type 1 diabetes. So elevated sclerostin levels in turn inhibit WNT signaling pathway. And we know the WNT signaling pathway is essential for the osteoblast for bone formation. So increased sclerostin levels reduces WNT signaling pathway and thereby further inhibiting bone formation. So I will just apart. So so these are the highlights of how diabetes can affect bone, or rather diabetes can reduce osteoblast function and increase and paradoxically increase osteoclast function. So how does insulin affect bone, right? I mean, the factors which were operational only in type 1 diabetes rather. How does insulin affect bone? So in normal physiology, this P27 is a cell cycle inhibitor actually. P27 inhibits CDK2. Actually, CDK2 in turn is a cell cycle activator. So CDK2 is required for a differentiation of pre-osteoblast to osteoblast. Under normal physiology, P27 inhibits CDK2 and thereby prevents differentiation of pre-osteoblast to osteoblast. Under normal physiology, insulin in turn inhibits this P27. Thereby, there is de-repression of CDK2. So insulin per se promotes differentiation of pre-osteoblast to osteoblast. So, but in type 1 diabetes, there is absolute insulin deficiency. Hence, this differentiation of pre-osteoblast to osteoblast is adversely affected. Again, how does insulin affect bone? So under normal physiology, there is a molecule called BAD. BAD stands for BCL associated death promoter. It is actually an activator of apoptosis. So BAD promotes osteoblast apoptosis. However, in the presence of insulin in normal physiology, insulin actually via PI3 kinase pathway, the one of the two pathways of action of insulin, it phosphorylates. It phosphorylates this BAD molecule, and once this BAD molecule is phosphorylated, apoptosis is inhibited. Thereby, insulin under normal physiology inhibits apoptosis. Insulin under normal physiology promotes pre-osteoblast differentiation, and hence in the presence of absolute insulin deficiency, as in type 1 diabetes, osteoblast function is affected, bone quantity is affected. And how does age affect bone? Age, by age I mean advanced ligation end product and not literally age. So we all talk about like age is affecting bone quality, but how does it do so? One is by age age leads to cross-linking of collagen actually. So this cross-linking of collagen, it directly hampers bone quality, and at the same time it prevents attachment of osteoblasts to the bone matrix. If osteoblasts are not being able to attach to the bone matrix, mineralization of the bone is affected. So I will discuss later that there are studies which have shown that the mineral to matrix ratio is reduced. So if age prevents osteoblasts from getting attached to the matrix, so mineral deposition will be impaired, hence mineralization will be impaired. At the same time, age reduces the alkaline phosphatase activity of osteoblasts. So if alkaline phosphatase activity is reduced, again, osteoid mineralization would be adversely affected. And lastly, age binds to RAGE. RAGE stands for receptor of age, which are present on pre-osteoclast actually. So activation of RAGE by age, it leads to production of cytokines and reactive oxygen species. And as I've already told in the previous slides, that cytokine and reactive oxygen species, it exerts a differential effect whereby it inhibits osteoblast function and promotes osteoclast function. So these are the three principal mechanisms by how age, which is operational in both type 1 and both type 2 diabetes, by how age affects bone fragility in diabetes mellitus. So what about, so there is no controversy that, so there is little controversy that BMD is reduced in type 1 diabetes. That I have said that there are contradictory data, but the overall consensus is that BMD is low in type 1 diabetes. What about type 2 diabetes? As I said, the data is controversial. The data is the data is extremely variable. So I've tried to assimilate the available studies, rather collate the studies that have been reported from India. So there are 4 studies that are from India that have shown that that bone mineral density is high or at least comparable to controls in patients with type 2 diabetes, while there are only 2 studies that have shown that BMD is low in type 2 diabetes compared to controls. Here again, there is a dichotomy in data. However, most of the available data again suggests that BMD is increased rather than being reduced in type 2 diabetes. Again, here this is something, I mean all must have gone through this. This is another highly quoted study. So we call it the paradox in diabetes. So on one hand, we are saying that BMD is increased, and on the other hand, we are saying that fracture risk is increased in diabetes. So why so? So if you look into this, I mean, both the pictures, men and women. So the continuous line represent non-diabetic subjects, while the dotted line represents diabetic subjects. So leave out the part that whether the patient are on insulin or not. So let's leave that part out. Let's just concentrate on 2 lines: patients with diabetes, patients without diabetes, rather subjects with diabetes, subjects without diabetes. So if we look, say, if we draw a line from t-score of -2 to the, so if we look here, so at a specific at any t-score, the fracture risk is high in type 2 diabetes. So this is something very worthwhile. So BMD is not the only parameter. The bone quantity is not the sole parameter that is affecting fracture risk in type 2 diabetes. Hence, probably bone density, rather bone quantity, rather takes a back seat, and bone quality takes a front seat when it comes to bone disease in context of diabetes. So at any specific t-score, the fracture risk is high in type 2 diabetes compared to non-diabetic controls. So now the question arises: why is BMD high or normal in type 2 diabetes? So this is I mean, there are 2 explanations. One explanation is that basically high BMI. Basically, type 2 diabetes patients tend to be obese, and it has been shown that. Yeah, so it has been shown that.
I would request everybody to mute themselves, please.
Yeah. So why is BMD high or no? Yeah.
Dr. Umanath, can you mute yourself, please? A lot of background noise is coming from your. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So why is BMD high or normal in type 2 diabetes? So there are 2 explanations. For the widely accepted explanation is the fact that BMI is high in patients with type 2 diabetes. So basically, there is a positive correlation between BMI and BMD. Higher the BMI, lower the BMD. So there are studies which have shown. So if we go back a few slides, like I had quoted a study by Sadish Kumar sir from CMC Vellore, from JIPMER. I'm sorry. So the study had classically shown that patients with diabetes had a high BMI. Patients with type 2 diabetes had a high BMI compared to controls. But when they performed a multivariate analysis and adjusted for BMI, this effect was lost. So it is said that a high BMI might be a confounding factor leading to high BMD, leading to falsely high BMD in type 2 diabetes. But having said so, there are studies that have shown that even after adjusting for BMI, BMD has been shown to be high in type 2 diabetes. This has been speculated. It is an entire speculation that hyperinsulinemia per se can lead to increased BMD. Now, one may argue that type 2 diabetes is a set of insulin resistance. So how is insulin being able to act? So I don't have an answer to it. So this is just a speculation that apart from high BMI, probably the high circulating insulin levels might be another factor leading to high BMD in type 2 diabetes. So, having said so, why is fracture risk high despite a high or a normal BMD in type 2 diabetes? So again, why is the diabetic paradox? So why is this diabetic paradox? So here comes the role of bone quality, which takes a much higher seat when it comes to bone disease in the context of diabetes. So how can bone quality be assessed? Definitely bone quality cannot be assessed by DEXA. DEXA is just a measure of bone mass, bone mineral density, and it can no way assess bone quality. On the other hand, bone density can, bone quality can be assessed by few things like TBS. So there is something I won't say it is new. It is something pretty old, but relatively new as far as the Indian context is concerned. With that stands for trabecular bone score. Usually TBS is calculated at the lumbar spine, and it is calculated from DEXA images. It requires just a software called TBS Insight software. That's all. And it is a measure of the bone. It is a measure of the bone microarchitecture. Again, we call it TBS, but again, it cannot differentiate between trabecular and cortical bone actually. So, but considering the fact that we measure TBS at lumbar spine, where 90% of the bone is trabecular bone, we believe that the data we obtain from TBS is a measure of the trabecular bone score rather than the cortical bone score. So the one is TBS. Another is hip geometry. Again, this can be obtained using a software from the same DEXA images. Then we have the peripheral QCT and its improved version, the high resolution peripheral QCT, which is used for measuring bone quality at the distal radius and the distal tibia, and an improved version of high resolution PQCT called the microCT, which has a further improved resolution compared to HRPQCT. Then we can perform bone composition analysis and bone histomorphometry. However, for this we need a bone biopsy and a in vitro bone sample. So I will just touch through these aspects to make our residents aware about this. So this was a recently published study in the Osteoporosis International from CMC Vellore. Actually, it's a very nice study. Actually, they have looked into 202 type 2 postmenopausal type 2 diabetes postmenopausal women and an almost equal number of age and BMI match controls. They found that the prevalence of osteoporosis based on lumbar spine BMD was less in cases compared to control. If you see, again highlighting the fact that BMD is high or preserved or normal in type 2 diabetes. Based on BMD, osteoporosis was less in cases compared to controls. However, TBS basically this cutoff is based from a prior study, like TBS cutoff of less than 1.2 suggests degraded bone microarchitecture. However, when they considered TBS, they found that degraded bone microarchitecture was more in cases than in controls. Again, and proximal hip geometry was significantly impaired in cases compared to controls. So this again highlights the fact that bone quantity is not that important in type 2 diabetes, but bone quality is more important in type 2 diabetes. And a few words about HRPQCT and microPQCT, like what they can detect. They can detect increased cortical porosity in type 2 diabetes, like increased cortical porosity, reduced trabecular number, reduced trabecular volume, and increased trabecular separation. Now, of these few parameters, it is the increased cortical porosity that is consistently that is a consistent finding in patients with type 2 diabetes. I will just elaborate this in the next slide. So this is a very beautiful pictorial representation. So the upper row, the row A, represents postmenopausal women without type 2 diabetes, and the row below, the row B, represents postmenopausal women with type 2 diabetes and fragility fractures. So if you look into the first two images, the first image is just a 2D image, the second image is a 3D image, and the third image is a cortical image actually, which is highlighting the cortical thickness as well as the cortical porosity. So the cortical porosity is represented by the green patches. So if you compare, figure A with figure B, the thing that is pretty obvious is the increased cortical porosity in type 2 diabetes. Maybe in patient with type 2 diabetes, or the cortical bone is completely studded with green dots rather than being gray being the normal cortex. However, if you look into the other two pictures, that is the Roman 1 and the Roman 2, there hardly seems to be a much difference between the postmenopausal woman without diabetes and with diabetes. So as I was saying, that using high resolution PQCT, the consistent finding that has come out is an increased cortical porosity, while trabecular differences, as I said, trabecular number is reduced, trabecular separation is increased. These findings are not that apparent in using HRPQCT. If you A and B, Roman 1, Roman 2, and B, Roman 1, Roman 2 are almost same. The only thing that is grossly obvious is increased cortical porosity. But here is a fallacy actually. The resolution power of HRPQCT is around 200 micrometer. On the other hand, the trabecular thickness can be as low as 100 micrometer. So the resolution power of HRPQCT is somewhat less as far as trabecular parameters are concerned. So HRPQCT might not be a good modality as far as trabecular parameters are concerned, but it is definitely a very good modality as far as cortical parameters are concerned. So, so to improve on this deficiencies in HRPQCT, we have a new modality that is called the microCT. It has a resolution power which is better than the HRPQCT to the tune of 50 to 100 micrometer. So, so this was a study from our institute only, from BGI itself. I will elaborate it in the next slides. So when we compared the diabetic and non-diabetic bone using microCT, we found that trabecular thickness, trabecular separation, and trabecular number were markedly different, as was expected. So, which is pretty evident in the picture as well. The trabecular thickness is reduced, trabecular number is reduced, and the trabecular separation, trabecular spaces are increased. So, again, these are bone, bone quality parameters. And we are improving more and more with advanced technology. And lastly, a little bit about bone composition analysis. This was a study that was recently published in JCM this year. So from our institute So this had looked into the mechanical, material, and compositional determinants of trabecular bone quality in type 2 diabetes. So the study had recruited 40 patients with type 2 diabetes and 30 subjects without diabetes, age and sex match, obviously. So there was no difference in BMD at the lumbar spine and femoral neck between the two groups, as is expected in type 2 diabetes. However, basically this study required actually bone biopsy. When the bone biopsy data was analyzed, so I've just collated two data. The rest of the things become a bit too basic science than and not much clinical. So if you look into the left figure, as I was talking about, the mineral to matrix ratio is reduced in diabetes. So as I was talking in the previous slides, increased accumulation of advanced glycation end product reduces binding of osteoblasts to the matrix, thereby impairing mineral deposition. So mineral is reduced, matrix is either normal or increased, thereby the mineral to matrix ratio is reduced in type 2 diabetes, as is seen on the left side. On the right side, we have looked into fluorescent age, basically age. We have looked into advanced glycation end product, which is obviously increased in type 2 diabetes. So this is a bone composition analysis study. And about bone histomorphometry, this remains a gold standard to study bone turnover, we all know. However, this is not always possible because it is invasive and requires adequate infrastructure and expertise. Even we don't have the adequate. We have recently procured a microtome. However, we do not have the microscope to look into the sections. So this is extremely, and this is hard to get. So this is usually not possible in routine clinical practice. However, this remains a gold standard. It requires in vivo tetracycline labeling. There is a definite protocol, 11353 protocol. It has been shown that diabetes is a state of low bone turnover, and this is called the bone formation rate bone surface. This is a measure of bone turnover. Actually, it has been shown that this index, which is a measure of bone turnover, this is reduced in type 2 diabetes by 70 to 80%. The same thing is seen in patients with hypoparathyroidism. So diabetes, hypoparathyroidism, all are states of low bone turnover, which is classically depicted in bone histomorphometry. However, it is not routinely available. So how can bone strength be assessed in diabetes? This is again a bit too theoretical. I will just highlight the point. Bone strength can be assessed by something called indentation studies and microfinite element studies. By indentation studies are becoming more and more available actually. Probably it is also not available at our institute, but it is becoming more and more available. So we have something called micro indentation and nano indentation, whereby we measure something called bone strength. So it has been shown that, I will not go into the details, that bone strength is reduced in type 2 diabetes compared to age and sex match controls. In other words, if you look into the right column, by nano indentation, we measure bone hardness and bone elasticity. It has been shown that both hardness and elasticity is reduced in type 2 diabetes, thereby making the bones brittle. Like if a bone is less hard, it will fracture. If a bone is less elastic, again it will fracture. So it is like a synergistic effect, 1 + 1 culminating into 5. So diabetes reduces bone hardness, reduces bone elasticity, thereby predisposing them to fracture easily. So what is the status of bone turnover markers in type 2 diabetes? Again, bone turnover markers per se is a matter of extreme controversy in whatever be the context. But in diabetes, it has been shown, since it is a state of low bone turnover marker, usually both bone formation and bone resorption, bone formation represented by P1NP and osteocalcin, while bone resorption represented by CTX, C-terminal telopeptide, and tartrate resistant acid phosphatase 5B are reduced. But the rest are either normal or slightly elevated, but the usual consensus is that bone turnover markers are reduced. Now, I want to go back a few slides. So, on the other hand, I had said that cortical porosity is increased in type 1 in diabetes. On the other hand, I'm saying that bone turnover markers are reduced. Actually, cortical porosity is a measure of increased bone turnover. However, so we expect bone turnover to be increased, but bone turnover is reduced. So this is something that is not explained, that is unexplainable. And I searched through literature. I couldn't find much data regarding much answer behind this. One answer could be that that cortical porosity is measured in the peripheral skeleton actually. This HRPQ-CT and micro-CT are designed for the peripheral skeleton, that is distal tibia or distal radius. So peripheral skeleton, so whatever is happening in the peripheral skeleton might not be representative of what is happening in the actual skeleton, which we usually by bone histomorphometry we usually perform an iliac crest biopsy with this axial skeleton. So both might not go hand in hand, though I think it might not be a proper explanation for the same. So there's definitely a discrepancy between the robustness of cortical porosity and the low bone turnover state in diabetes. So how to assess it? This is something very interesting, and I find it extremely interesting actually. So how to assess fracture risk in type 1 diabetes? So having said so many things like bone quality, micro CT, nano CT, so and so, blah blah, bone strength. Ultimately, for assessing fracture risk, we come back to FRAX and BMD. What we have in hand for assessing fracture risk in diabetes is FRAX and BMD, nothing else. So as of date, we can use TBS for adjusting the FRAX, but even that is not, so as I said, TBS is not available, is not rampantly available. So what we have in hand is this FRAX, and FRAX is online calculator and a BMD at hand. So how to, how to modulate or twist the FRAX so as to calculate fracture risk in type 1 diabetes. So while calculating fracture risk in type 1 diabetes, we usually mark this as yes. Now, we might not know, when I came to know recently, this secondary osteoporosis, in this FRAX, insulin-dependent diabetes is listed as one of the causes. So if we are dealing with a patient with type 1 diabetes, we have to take this as yes. So if you look into this, so I've used the Indian FRAX, which is based on Singapore Indians, not typically native or indigenous Indians, Singapore Indians. So I've ticked it as yes, and I've mentioned the age of the patient as 41 because usually FRAX is meant for the age of 40 to 90. This is again a fallacy in our setting because hardly our type 1 diabetes patients are alive beyond the age of 40 years. So below 40 years, I'm not very sure how to calculate fracture risk using FRAX. So I've taken an imaginary patient with the age of 41 year, male, height and weight. I've put in rest of the factors all no, and I've ticked it as yes. Here the FRAX calculates the risk of MOF as 1.1% and hip fracture as 0%. I want you to note this, to keep this in mind. Now, supposedly this was done in a periphery where BMD was not available. Supposedly this patient comes to IPGMER where DEXA is available, and we get a DEXA done, and the T-score comes out to be -2.8. We put in the minus T-score. We again make it no. The secondary osteoporosis have made it no. And if we see here, the risk changes to 2.8% and 1.5% from a value of 1.1 to 1.2 and 0 to 2.8 and 1.5. Now the funny part is if we put in the same value as -2.8 and if we tick secondary osteoporosis as yes, even then the risk remains the same. So what I mean to say is that if we have a BMD value, it is immaterial whether you tick whether you select the secondary osteoporosis column as yes or no. So once you put in the BMD value, the secondary osteoporosis thing is completely nullified. It's completely nullified. So either you, so if you have a BMD value, to you put in the TBA, I mean the T score or the femoral neck BMD, and there is no need, and you forget about the rest. If you do not have a BMD value or a T score value, you will have to select the yes against the secondary osteoporosis column. This I find it very, very interesting actually. So once you put in the BMD value, everything is nullified actually. Not everything, the secondary osteoporosis part is nullified. And this is a study from actually Professor Viral Shah, who happened to be our alumnus from the Barbary Davis Center, and they showed that even if BMD is not available, so say in the periphery, if BMD is not available, fracture risk assessment without BMD is a very good prognosticator of subsequent of the risk of major osteoporotic fractures. So if we have highlighted the conclusion part only, clinical use of FRAX without BMD is a useful tool in identifying adults with type 1 diabetes at a high risk for major osteoporosis fracture, which can be used for subsequent therapeutic decision making. So even if you don't have BMD, we need not worry. We can simply use the online FRAX calculator, put in select the secondary osteoporosis option as yes, and go ahead with fracture risk assessment. The thing is something different in as far as type 2 diabetes is concerned. In type 2 diabetes, as I said, BMD might be fallacious. BMD might be fallaciously high. T score might be fallaciously low. I mean, fallaciously high, I would rather say. T score might be better. So here there are three ways to alter the, three ways how we can adjust. We can either increase the age by 10 years. We can either put a tick against or rheumatoid osteoporosis. We can select rheumatoid arthritis as yes, or we can reduce the T-score by 5 further minus 0.5. Not all the three. Again, not all the, we should not do all the three, either of the three. Now, again, if we, now all the three, selecting all the three different, at different situation, we'll yield a different, will yield a different risk scores. That is pretty obvious. But as to the best of my knowledge, there are no studies that have head-to-head compared, that have compared head-to-head whether and which of the three adjustment is better. So what to use is I think I would leave it to the audience and I would leave it to the clinicians. Obviously, in a primary care setting, if you do not have a DEXA scan, we can either increase the age by 10 or select rheumatoid arthritis. If we have a DEXA scan, we can use either of the three. It is up to the discretion of the physicians, and something which is left for discussion as well. So what are the risk factors for fractures in diabetes? So the common risk factors which are applicable to all subjects without diabetes. These are the FRAX clinical risk factors, the 12 points I was talking about. I will go back. These are the 12 points: age, sex, weight, height, previous fracture, family history of fracture, current smoking, glucocorticoids, RA and alcohol intake. These are common to people with diabetes as well. Other common factors are low BMD and recurrent falls. These three factors are common to people with diabetes as well as people without diabetes. And what are the diabetes specific risk factors? Diabetes duration of more than 5 years, diabetes specific medications, which I will come in the subsequent slide, and HbA1c of more than 7%. This is also a bit dicey. The optimal cutoff, the cutoff beyond which the risk for bone disease or fracture increases, it is variable. Some studies have shown 7%, some 8.5%. So I will again leave it open. And certain microvascular complications like peripheral and autonomic neuropathy and retinopathy, which will further increase the risk of falls, and nephropathy, which will per se contribute to something called, which will per se contribute to secondary hyperpara actually. Nephropathy increased creatinine, which will per se lead to secondary hyperpara and per se or reduce BMD. These are the diabetes specific risk factors, and there are certain disease specific risk factors, like in type 1 diabetes. PBM stands for peak bone mass. So type 1 diabetes, usually the disease the onset of the disease usually coincides with attainment of peak bone mass. So if the disease sets in at a point where peak bone mass is being attained, so even the attainment of peak bone mass will be impaired. So if my peak bone mass is say around my peak bone BMD at the lumbar spine is 0.8. A type 1 diabetes will not be able to attain a 0.8 BMD, 0.8 gram per centimeters BMD at all. So this is something very particular of type 1 diabetes, and co-association of celiac disease and hyperthyroidism, which are other autoimmune diseases which may coexist with type 1 diabetes. This per se can affect BMD and subsequent fracture risk. As far as type 2 diabetes is concerned, vitamin D deficiency is a major risk factor. In India, vitamin D deficiency is rampant. 70 to 80% of the population are vitamin D deficient. But in type 2 diabetes, since they are obese and vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, so the vitamin tends to get sequestered within the fat rather than circulating in the blood. So thereby further predisposing them to vitamin D deficiency. And factors that are common to type 1 and type 2 diabetes that increases the risk of fractures are sarcopenia. This is something that is very, very less talked about actually. Sarcopenia is something common to both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. In our setting, I feel sarcopenia is much more common in type 1 diabetes than type 2 diabetes. And sarcopenia per se basically predisposes to osteoporosis, falls, and subsequent fracture. There is an identical. Some noise.
Nilanjan, can you mute yourself, please? Okay, carry on.
Yeah. So there's in fact an entity called osteosarcopenia. Like bone and muscle are a composite unit. You cannot separate one from the other. So sarcopenia predisposes to osteoporosis. Osteoporosis predisposes to sarcopenia. It's like a vicious cycle, but we hardly talk about this. This is something common to type 1 and type 2 diabetes, something that needs to be taken care of for optimal management of diabetic bone disease, something that needs to be more talked of, something that needs to be more researched upon. So as I was talking about, what are the anti-diabetic therapy that can affect bone disease? So typically metformin, sulfonylureas, and incretins are usually said to be bone neutral. Sulfonylureas can increase the risk of, some studies have shown increased risk of fracture with sulfonylurea, likely because of hypoglycemia and subsequent falls. Thiazolidinediones undoubtedly reduces BMD, increases the risk of fractures. Preferably should be avoided in elderly patient, at least in postmenopausal women with diabetes, preferably should be avoided. SGLT2 inhibitors, it was canagliflozin canvas study that had shown that fracture risk is increased, but subsequent meta-analysis have shown that fracture risk is not increased. So that is again something dicey, but even if it is increased only with canagliflozin. Again, I don't know how to explain this disparity in class effect, but insulin definitely has been shown to increase the risk of fractures. Why? Because use of insulin is per se indirect marker of advanced diabetes. One. Second, the use of insulin is per se a marker of, advanced duration of disease rather, I would say. It is again an indirect marker of advanced disease with more complications, and use of insulin is associated with hypoglycemia, falls, and increased risk of fractures. And something that we usually don't perform routinely, something that the bariatric surgery often performed in the initial stages of type 2 diabetes for ensuring diabetes remission. Even bariatric surgery has been shown to increase the risk of fracture, especially the malabsorptive procedures like the biliopancreatic diversions. However, biliopancreatic diversions are rarely performed these days. So this is something which we had proposed in a recently published article from our institute. So there's something this is a proposition, but I think this is a food for thought for many of us to work upon. So there are some features which are very typical in the Indian context actually. So diabetes sets in earlier in the Indian scenario, which can affect the attainment of peak bone mass. Indians tend to have more of central obesity, more of insulin resistance, and more of inflammatory markers, which can probably lead to more bone damage. Indians are per se prone to vitamin A deficiency, and Indians tend to have an early age at menopause. All this can per se worsen the situation as far as diabetic bone disease is concerned. However, this is just a proposition. I think we can somehow work on this. Comparing a Caucasian and a similar Indian cohort, perhaps we can work on it. So how to approach a patient with diabetic bone disease? I will request my colleagues to go through this article. Actually, this was published in 2018 in Osteoporosis International by Ferrari et al. This is a very nice article actually. So in a patient with diabetes, if a patient is having a clinical hip or a vertebral fracture, I want to impress upon the fact clinical. A hip fracture is always clinical. In fact, a vertebral fracture may or may not be clinical. A clinical hip or vertebral fracture, straight away go ahead with osteoporosis therapy. However, if the patient is having other fracture other than a hip or a vertebral fracture, go for a DEXA scan. If a DEXA scan reveals, your DEXA scan a VFA actually. If a VFA reveals a morphometric vertebral fracture, again go ahead with the osteoporosis therapy. However, if the DEXA scan shows a t-score of minus 2.0. Again, I said a minus 2.0 t-score is equal to minus 2.5 because we will have to reduce the t-score by minus 2.5. Again, that qualifies as having osteoporosis. So go ahead with osteoporosis therapy, or we can calculate the FRAX score adjusted for diabetes. We have talked about the adjustment earlier. And if the FRAX score exceeds the country-specific intervention threshold, as of now, we use the NOF threshold, that is 3% and 20%. If we exceed that 20% or 3%, we again treat. However, if we do not exceed the country-specific threshold, we follow up with a DEXA scan at every 2 to 3 years. However, if the patient is not having fracture and not having other clinical risk factors like age, sex, previous history of fracture, then we perform a yearly clinical assessment and a DEXA scan for every 2 years. So I think this is a very sound approach which we can all practice in routine. We can all adapt in routine clinical practice. And I will request all my colleagues to go through this article. It's extremely helpful. So what are the regarding management of diabetic bone disease, general measures: calcium 100,000 mg per day, preferably it should come from diet. Vitamin D 800 to 1000 units per day. However, higher levels might be required in the Indian setting. Physical activity, I want to stress on this fact: physical activity should include aerobic, resistance, as well as balance exercise. Resistance exercise will improve muscle mass, prevent sarcopenia. Balance exercise will reduce the risk of falls. Avoid smoking and alcohol. Good glycemic control is essential. However, HbA1c target remains the same as in diabetes without bone disease, and avoid thiazolidinediones and possibly canagliflozin. So anti-osteoporosis therapy does not differ. International guidelines recommend the same therapeutic approach to osteoporosis regardless of the presence or absence of diabetes. As far as type 1 diabetes is concerned, data regarding anti-osteoporotic therapy, anti-osteoporotic medications are very rare. We have data only with alendronate and risedronate. However, as far as type 2 diabetes is concerned, we have data with alendronate, risedronate, zolendronate, denosumab, teriparatide, and abaloparatide. I just want to discuss a little bit about denosumab. A sub-analysis of the Freedom trial, which had included about somewhere around 250 patients with diabetes and 250 patients without diabetes. They had shown that denosumab reduced vertebral fractures. On the contrary, it increased non-vertebral fractures. So if a patient is typically having lumbar spine osteoporosis or a lumbar spine fracture, patient with type 2 diabetes, denosumab is a very good option. And I want to again impress on the fact that denosumab per se has been shown to improve glucose control in patients with type 2 diabetes. This is something like killing two birds with one stone. So denosumab might be a very good option in patients with type 2 diabetes with predominant pathology in the spine. So concluding, diabetes leads to an increased fracture risk. Type 1 diabetes being more at a risk of fracture than type 2 diabetes. BMD is consistently low in type 1 diabetes, although it is variable in type 2 diabetes. Bone quality is consistently compromised in diabetes, as assessed by multiple bone quality parameters, which we have talked about. Certain anti-diabetic drugs can compromise bone health, should be avoided, especially in the elderly. Besides metabolic control, fracture risk reduction should be a goal for comprehensive management of type 2 diabetes. It should not be neglected. Thank you. I might have I might have exceeded the limit a bit.
No, it is not technically a conference sort of thing that you are given a time limit. So you can speak for another 30 minutes, no problem, because this sort of information, it was very exhaustive, very well spoken. This sort of information is needed really it is a difficult subject. And as I said, it raises more questions than answers.
Yes, absolutely.
Just a few points and then a few queries as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's always important that you mention at the end that the prevention is better than cure. It is a very important thing. So because many of us think that, yes, if I do walking every day, that will be enough to prevent falls. But actually, the balance, the muscles which are concerned with balance are not always the muscles which are concerned with walking. So what I tell my patients is that as you grow older, try balancing exercise. And why is yoga therefore more important? Because it uses balancing mechanisms. Right. So I said, you don't necessarily have to learn yoga. Stand on one feet for about 20 seconds a day. It is actually more difficult than it sounds. So stand on one feet for 20 seconds and then another feet for 20 seconds. This is the start of the balance, that gives the essence that this is the balance muscles are coming into play.
Right, sir.
Now, you have mentioned about the FRAX data. You mentioned about the fractures, but I think one important thing is that if you look at the data about the hip fractures in say Europeans compared to Asians compared to say the Negroid Afro-Caribbean. There is a big difference. You know, the Afro-Caribbeans have got really low fracture data, whereas the European Caucasian women have got higher hip fractures as compared to Asians. So it's good that you have shown data from the Indian subcontinent. Some of the data were there. And it would be very nice to compare the data, our data with their data with similar sort of patients. That
Absolutely.
will really tell us what exact difference we have, because at this moment we are extrapolating their data into
Absolutely, sir.
ours.
Yes, yes.
And that is a problem which is happening.
Absolutely. So actually, I just want to interfere once. Actually, most of the data which are shown in that table, that is mostly the data on BMD. Actually, even most of those studies do not comment on fracture. So one study which I had highlighted from CMC Vellore by Professor Thomas Paul, they had shown that fractures were similar between the cases and controls. Morphometric fracture as measured by VFA. But there is another study from, actually, we must have heard about the ICMR INDIAB study, which was a nationwide study to look into the prevalence of diabetes. They also looked into self-reported fractures. Actually, they found that the prevalence of fractures in self-reported diabetes was 4%. So this is, I think, the 4%. What I can remember, I'm not exactly sure. It was 4%, but it was higher than controls. I think it was control. It was around 1.4, something like that. It was higher than control. So it was a nationwide study, good number of patients. I mean, that is a maximum, that is probably the only nationwide study that is available, that is self-reported fracture. Again, that is a small fallacy out there.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not aware of the fracture data for the INDIAB study you said. And as you mentioned about the FRAX, mentioning in the secondary osteoporosis column, if you put yes, it is
Yes,
clearly written type 1. It completely ignores type 2. And actually, I can't remember where I've written it. Was it in the editorial or someplace? It is written that this is, was it overlooked, or was it because we just don't know? And don't know, that's why it was put, and not type 2 box wasn't there for the FRAX data.
So probably the same reason. Probably it was known while the FRAX was being calculated, it was known that BMD is consistently low in type 1 diabetes. But in type 2 diabetes, it is actually most of the Caucasian data says that it is high. But it is the Indian, most of the Indian data that is variable. I'm not very sure about the African American data, but the Caucasian data unanimously says that BMD is either normal or high. So probably keeping that in mind, it was done.
Yeah, and I think probably the type 2 data needs to be teased out as well. So is it related to the duration of diabetes? You know, so when you become insulinopenic, is it becoming more like type 1, therefore more at risk? So duration of diabetes vis-a-vis the BMD vis-a-vis the fracture. Obviously, more duration diabetes means an elderly person means you will have fracture, but that has to be balanced with non-diabetic people of the same age and diabetic people of the same age, duration of diabetes. That data at this moment is we don't have.
No, sir. Duration of data is usually available. The duration of diabetes is usually said that some
studies. Not Indian patients, I think.
Not Indian patients. I agree. Not Indian patients, I agree. So we had performed a study actually where I didn't show it was not that a good one actually. We had looked into around 250 consecutive patients with type 2 diabetes. We didn't have any controls actually. We didn't have any controls. We found that we looked into simple osteoporosis, osteopenia based on DEXA scan. There was no correlation with diabetes duration with either the prevalence of osteopenia or osteoporosis. We have this one data that was published in the Journal of Diabetes. It was not a mediocre journal, and we didn't have a control group.
Okay.
So that's it.
You mentioned about the denosumab. I think the only one probably downside is the rapid worsening once you stop it.
Rebound vertebral fractures. Yes.
That's the only. I'm not aware whether that is more so in diabetic patients, or is it the same like non-diabetics that your fracture is.
I have no idea.
I mean, of all the agents, this is the agent which has got the most increase if you stop.
Yes.
And don't start something else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I am not sure about that data. Yeah. I have no idea.
Okay, so I have been doing all the talking. So anybody else wants to ask any questions? My apologies, I have not asked anybody to ask any questions.
Yeah,
I can't see in the chat box.
Yeah, I have a question basic
Right,
question to Ramesh.
right, sir.
So you have said that bone hardness and elasticity is low in diabetes. Now, what may be the mechanisms, if any, apart from iatrogenic or apart from old age, means not the drugs contributing, so inherent whether the diabetes process itself, whether the chronic hyperglycemia, whether the pathophysiology of diabetes has something to do with the poor bone quality or hardness is number one. And number two, so far we are interested in prevention. So in patients of diabetes, apart from glycemic control and apart from routine anti-osteoporotic measures, would there be anything special that can prevent an osteoporotic fracture?
Regarding the first question, sir, regarding basically the basic pathophysiology, again, I've said the basic pathophysiology in diabetes is reduce osteoblast function and increase osteoclast function. And at the same time, regarding this hard elasticity part, rather, I would say, osteocytes play a very important role because they are the mechanosensors. So these osteocytes per se, it is a hyperglycemia per se has a direct detrimental effect on osteocytes. So does age. So if osteocyte function is impaired, these micro cracks and micro fractures won't be sensed. Remodeling is uncoupled, and which can predispose them to fractures. Rather, basically, elasticity is nothing but a measure like how if you hit a bone, how quickly and how completely it can recover. So I feel as far as elasticity is concerned, osteocytes play a major role, and osteocyte function is definitely impaired as you said, because of the intrinsic effect of hyperglycemia, intrinsic effect of age, intrinsic effect of reactive oxygen species. So leaving apart the well-known aspect of osteoblast and osteoclast. Secondly, sir, regarding the anything specific, I would say, right, specific in type 2 diabetes, specific, yeah, good glycemic control. Definitely good glycemic control. Again, as I said.
But do you have any data that good glycemic control
Yes.
prevent osteoporosis in type 1?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is a data which have shown that if HbA1c is kept between 6.5 and 6.9%, bone diseases in diabetes is reduced. But again, attainment of 6.5 to 6.9% may not always be feasible, and at the same time may not always be practical. Should not be, in fact, should not be attained in elderly subjects or those with comorbidities. So it is said that the glycemic target should be same as in diabetes without osteoporosis. But definitely, if I compare a patient with HbA1c of say 7.5%, which is maintained for about 2 years, and an age and sex match subject with a HbA1c average HbA1c of 10% maintained over the same duration, I expect that the one with a good glycemic control will definitely have a lower chance of developing diabetic bone disease in the long run. Again, like a metabolic memory, I feel, which can also be applicable, which can also be applied to to bones in diabetes.
I think from Dr. Senguttu's question, I think what you are saying is probably cross-sectional data about the HbA1c being say 7% as opposed to somebody having 9%, and the problems occurring more in this the 9%. But is there any longitudinal data? So
yes, sir,
you start with 10%, and these are the things, the turnover and the fracture risk, and now you reduce it to say 7%, and now what happens?
Yes, sir. So the data is, there is a data with respect to type 1 diabetes actually. I don't exactly recollect that. Started with something around 7%, brought it down to something with 10%, I'm sorry, brought it down to 7%. And they found that there was, but I think that they didn't look into BMD, they looked into some other parameters actually. I don't exactly remember about this. I was going through it. There is a study in type 1 diabetes, definitely. I'm not very sure about type 2 diabetes.
If I simplify, will it be fair to say that type 1, the hardness is affected, type 2, the elasticity is affected? A very simple term. The cortical bone in type 1 is not that simple, I understand, is the cortical bone, and in the type 2, the matrix because their AGs affect more the matrix than the cortical bone. Am I right in saying that, or not completely right?
So I would partly disagree with it. It's actually
Yes,
it is
okay.
both hardness and elasticity that is affected in both the conditions. You may call it hardness is more affected in type 1.
Yeah, yes.
But
I'm saying
elasticity-
that predominantly the hardness is predominant problem in the type 1 being
But
affected,
I feel
and the
elasticity
in type 2.
elasticity is affected both in type 1 and type 2 to equal extent,
Okay.
I feel.
Okay.
Because age is age is
Equal to both.
equal
Yes.
to both, I feel. I mean, that is what I feel.
Okay. So any other questions, I think? Let me see the chat box. I can't see anything in the chat box. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think this was very illuminating. It's a big area, very difficult area. Sometimes it becomes very confusing, but I think Dr. Ramesh Pal has collated all the data very nicely, and he has shown his data as well. And I hope in the future he does accumulate more data and has more
Thank you, sir.
comparisons with the Caucasian population as well. That will it will be really worth publishing in good quality journals as well. So I think with that, I would like to end here. So who do I hand over to give the vote of thanks? Is it Ovirup?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So thank
you
you,
take over.
Dr. Ramesh Pal and Dr. Kallan Kumar Gangopadhyay,
Thank you
sir,
so much.
for presenting to us an excellent academic session. And I would also like to thank our audience for their patient hearing. And I have an announcement here. So our next 4E webinar is scheduled to be held on 6th August 2021. The topic of discussion will be cyclic Cushing, and that day the speaker will be Dr. Bipul Chaudhary, sir. He is working as an associate professor in Guwahati Medical College, Guwahati, Assam. And the session will be chaired by Dr. Tushar Ramkrishna Bandgar, sir. Sir is currently HOD of Department of Endocrinology in KMA Hospital, Mumbai. So with this, I would like to conclude today's event. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you so much. Good night. Take care.
Thank you. Stay safe. Good night.
Good night. Take care.